Dvoch, welcome to tonight's Shir, Motzei Shabbos Bereishis. A little bit later than usual. This is hopefully once the days become shorter, the nights become longer, we'll be able to start the Shir at 8:30. Tonight we're starting at 9 o'clock. And I've said 9:45, so end time. We'll see how we'll do. Okay, so let's go our first question. So in middle of Sukkot, someone from overseas says, oops, in the middle of Sukkot, he realized that his sukkah had been covered, the sukkah had been put up by a Eina Yehudi, and he didn't do anything, he didn't intervene at all. And so what's the story there? So we learned actually in this year, in the evening shir, we went through these halachas, and we have in Siman Tov Reish Lamed Hey, Sukkah's Ganvach Verakvash. And Ganvach stands for Goyim, Noshim, Behemoths, etc. Then Rak, so it's Royim, Kayotzim. So it says very clear, the sukkah does not need to have been made l'shem mitzvah. It has to have been made l'shem tzel, for shade. And so therefore, even if it's made by Nochrim, as long as it was made for shade, it's okay, it's valid. So when your caretaker put up your sukkah, and it was obviously l'shem tzel, so the sukkah is a kosher sukkah. And yet there is a Stadlos, people try to make sure that the Yid is involved. So on this screen you have from the Sefer Bikurei Yaakov. This is from Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger. He is more known perhaps for his Pirush Aruch L'Ner. He lived in Germany about 150, 180 years ago. So he wrote a Pirush on the halachas of Sukkah, Lulav and Sukkah, which is, so he discusses this. So he wants to say, Dafka ha'asuya kvar ksheira. It's if it's already been built, it's kosher. But l'chatchila, you shouldn't be using to cover the sukkah, nochri or isho, or cotton less than 13 years old. So no question that it's kosher. Question is whether it's l'chatchila. So yeah, he's mechadish that it's not totally l'chatchila. But no question of the kashrus of the sukkah because it was put up l'shem tzel, it was constructed. We're not talking about the walls, as he says. We're talking about the schach. It was placed there for the purpose of shelter, which is the mitzvah sukkah. That's fine. Okay, let's go on to the next question, and that is about someone asked me about a snack bar made with mashed dates. That's very interesting. So I looked up. I have a sefer called Shari Habrocha, and I looked under snack bars. He tells me to look under Mamrach Tamarim, which means date spread, where he says the Brocha Rishon is Shahakol, and the Brocha Achrona is, see a footnote, which means it's complicated. So, but let's go through this carefully. The question about mashed dates is actually written in Gemara Brachas, and they have a word for it. It's called trimo, spelt tes reish yud mem aleph. Trimo is mashed dates. Now, the way the Tur brings this, he says, shenismachu ksas, that they're somewhat mashed, whereas the way the Bes Yosef challenges that, and he sees from the Rambam, it's not even a ksas, even they're totally mashed, and therefore when he brings the halach in Shulchan Aruch, he leaves out the word ksas. So let's read these words. This is from Siman Reish Beis. Tmorim shemiachon bayad. He's squeezed them, mashed them by hand. Ve'oso mehem iso. V'hoitzim mehem garinehem. The wording is interesting. Obviously, he first took out the date pits, and then he made them into a mush. And nevertheless, lo nishtanes birchason. The bracha doesn't change. And therefore the bracha remains Beire Pri Ha'etz, and the after bracha is bracha Me'en Shalosh. So the bracha on mashed dates is Ha'etz and bracha Me'en Shalosh. There are more comments on this, and he says something called Latvern. I think there's something now also with a similar word. But he said he has a pavidle. Pavidle is some kind of jam. According to this, a jam should also be prioritized. But others disagree with that, and they say it's shahakal. I hear that they say share screen isn't working. We're going to try again. Just give me a second and close it.
Some of us have it, I think, Diane. I have.
Okay. Well, try again.
I can see the screen.
Okay. Let me just open it again. Versions. Okay. Better now?
You've gone back to the beginning.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, some of us had it before.
Yeah, I'm asking the ones who didn't have it whether they have it. Okay, this is what we can do. All right. So the Ramo continues about Pavidle, and he says, but the Trumas Hadeshen says he should say Shahakal on Pavidle. So there we go. So then this Mishnah Berurah now has an interesting question. That now that we have this, let's say this Pavidle. Okay, so there's a svara that it's ha'etz, and then pro svara is a shahakal. So if the same pavidla would be made from something from shivas haminim, let's say from whether from grapes or from pomegranates, if you had such a paste, and according to the first opinion, it's by a pri ha'etz. According to the second opinion, it's shahakal. Now, what is the after bracha? It's all very well for the bracha rishona because Sophic bracha shahakal covers, but when it comes to the after bracha, boyer nefoshes doesn't cover instead of shalosh and shalosh. So he says he's a bit stuck with that. He doesn't really have an eitzah. Okay, so now let's go a little bit further on this discussion. This is how it's brought in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. Tmorim shemiachon beyad v'hoitzi garineim asim mehem iso v'chein kol kochayetz mishar peiris. It brings that even though that's not the normal thing to do, the bracha remains ha'etz. So just to summarize, why is that this halacha that mashed dates are going to be still ha'etz? And the answer is when you look at mashed dates, it's recognizable as what it is, and therefore it's going to be Beire Pri Ha'etz. So a practical extension of that, let's say mashed avocado. Avocado is common, people make it into a paste. What bracha is that? So everyone looks at it, knows it's avocado. So according to what we're learning here, that would be the bracha would be Beire Pri Ha'etz. By the way, that's a trick thing that I often ask in the class. Girls get the impression that avocado is hardoma because it's similar to a vegetable, but avocado is obviously a Beire Pri Ha'etz. Right. So now let's come back then to our bar. So if it looks like in the dark, the color of dates. It's just okay. Then it remains ha'etz. What he said over here is made into a paste, into a spreadable paste. Now, I think that is already it cannot be that that paste is just plain mashed dates because it would not be as smooth as it would be much thicker. You wouldn't be able to spread it the way you would be able to use these spreads. So obviously they've added something to it, and that's possibly why he's taking the position that the broch is shahakal. But when it's I believe, when it is taka like some kind of bar, and you look at it, it's got the same color, and when you try to bend it or whatever, you can feel that it is similar to the consistency of dates, of or what you'd be able to recognize. So then that's the halacha, which it says that the bracha remains ha'etz. Let's move on. So someone asked me the following question: should one rise for Baruch Hashem Hamveirach Lo'ilam Voed at the beginning of each aliyah? And further detail, he asked me, what about this lifting yourself up slightly? I was thinking of the word in Hebrew, L'hisroimim ktas. So at first I thought it was a simple, straightforward answer. I gave him a reference to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And over Shabbos, I had further thoughts about this. So here you have this Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You can see the reference, Siman Chav Gimel, that when the person has the Aliyah says Baruch Hu, and we respond Baruch Hashem Hamvoirach Leilam Voed, Tzrichin Kol HaTzibur La'amad. One is supposed to stand. And he says the bracha, and during Kriyas HaTorah, they're not a chiyuv to stand. Only Medaklik Mitzvahs will stand for the rest. Between the Gavra and Gavra, between the aliyahs, there's no reason to be machmir. Okay, I'm not going to go all of that. I'm just reading here that he's saying that for Baruch Hashem Hamvoirach Leilam Voed, we should be standing. Now, I'd like to share meta information, should we say, that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch has got three main sources. One is the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, another one is the Chaya Odom, and another is the Siddur Derech HaChaim. These are his main sources. Now, here you have on the screen the Siddur Derech HaChaim, Siman Ayin Perik Ayin Vov, which is almost, the Kitzur is almost word for word from the Siddur Derech HaChaim. Fine. Now, we have about 4 pages of Hagos HaSiddur of the Rebbe Rashab. And they are printed in the back of the Siddur Imdach. They're printed in the back of the Siddur Torah and in the recent volume of Torah Shalom, Shalom, they've been included there. In my Siddur, the first edition, it was also included at the back, but in the new edition, each item from that list of Hagos was put on the right page, on the relevant page. Coming back. So he starts off, Ayin v'derech hachayim, Siman Ayin Vov. Whether one ought to be standing for Kriyas HaTorah, right. And then he quotes from Shmuel and She'orim, from the Rab Chaim Vital, from the Arizal. And the Arizal would kiss the Sefer Torah. He would accompany it until the Teva, namely the Bima, where the readings takes place. Then he went back to his place and he would stay seated until the end of Kriyas HaParsha, so now, it looks like the Arizal did not stay standing for Baruch Hashem Hamavoach Leilam Voed, and the Kaf HaChaim says that diuk too. Now, there is, the Alter Rebbe mentions this in Shulchan Aruch. Does one need to stand for Kaddish? And they bring the poskim bring a raya from this king of Egloin Melech Moav, when he had a message from Hashem, through the Novi, he stands up. So if he stood up, we should also be standing up for Kaddish. Despite that, the Arizal clearly, I think the Alter Rebbe mentions this in Shulchan Aruch, was not particular to stand up for Kaddish. If he was already standing, he remained standing, but he would not arise for Kaddish. So what's the why should you have to stand for Baruch Hashem Averech Lo Elam V'Oed? Because it's the status of Dover Shebekdusha, something which is normally said only with a minion. So that's a Dover Shebekdusha. Needs to so then a Dover Shebekdusha should be standing, but there's no logical difference between standing for Baruch Hashem Averech Lo Elam V'Oed and standing for Kaddish. And if you can stay seated for Kaddish, you can stay seated for this Baruch Hu also. So that's now, so it's not so straightforward. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says yes, you should stand, and but it looks like according to the Arizal, it's not so necessarily the case. And this is from now you have on the screen from the Piskei Teshuvos, Simon Kuf Mem Vav, in the name of Kriyas HaTorah, and he quotes the Murk of the Mishnah Brura, who says, but when saying Baruch Hashem Avarech L'Kulei Alma, you have to stand. Then he says there are some very fine Jews who do not stand for Kriyas HaTorah, not even for Baruch Hu. And he gives a quote from Reb Chaim Vital, and as I said, and there are others also who take that view, and therefore, that is to summarize, although the Kitzur says he should stand for Baruch Hashem and Baruch Lo Avoid, if you're sitting anyways, there is room to be makel. And so now we've got two opinions, yeah? And then we've got this, and this I didn't manage to research adequately. We say, for example, by Zimun. So, especially when there's a Zimun with Hashem's name, they're to rise somewhat from your chair. So what exactly is that? And the same thing, what we've seen, people who are seated for during Kaddish, for Omesh Mirabel, they'll rise, Lisroimim Ma'at. So that seems to be some kind of shara. The Alpidin, you don't have to stand. As the Arizal remains seated. Kaddish Shatofsim Yushav, you remain seated. But nevertheless, since there is opinion that you should be standing, so out of respect, there is this Lisroimim Ma'at. Again, I haven't looked at this now. Years ago, I remember seeing a tshuva of Rebbe Avadia Yosef, whether one needs to rise for moedim. As far as I remember, he says you do have to stand. Again, you may look around and see people are not so particular. I'm wondering whether that is related to the same discussion of the Arizal not being particular to rise for a Davar Shebekdusha unless Tofsei Me'umid. Let's move on. So, simple question. Someone asked, could you use the arovis of the lulav to use them for Hashanahs? I suspect the question is that there was an earlier minyan and they've all finished using their lulavim, and now you can take those arovas freely, and then you can put them together, make a backpack of the Hashanahs. Because for arovas, the lulav you only have two. For Hashanahs, you have to take five. Anyway, so at the time I'd said it's okay, but afterwards I looked up in Shulchan Aruch. So let's read this carefully. This is in Tov Reish Nun. Tov Reish Sabach Daled. Towards the end of Hilchos Sukkah, talks about Hoshana Rabbah, and he says the Shulchan Aruch says you're not yotzer with the arova of the lulav, even if you lifted it twice. If you took the same lulav, you lifted it twice, once for lulav, and the second time you lifted it for the mitzvah of arova or the minig arova, you're not yotzer. On this, the Mishnah Mura says that's only if you lifted the second time. Well, the second opinion says you are yotzer. They says even the first opinion, that's only whilst it's still in the bunch, together with the lulav and the hadassim. But if you had undone the bunch, you've taken the arov away from them, pshita sheyotzer. So then he's quite confident. Mr. Burr says for sure that you could be yotzer with the arovas shebelulav. Once they be separated, you can use them for Hashanah. Okay, let's move on. So someone asked me, one of our regular listeners asked, is there some kind of connection between we've got 6 days of Hashanahs, and then the 7th day is Hoshana Rabbah. Is there a connection between the poems which are on each day to that particular day? So that's an interesting question. Now, to go back a bit, the Hoshana, broadly seems to be attributed to Rebbe Elazar of Kalir, and indeed, I think in the first long poem of what is said on Hoshana Rabbah, it goes through the whole Aleph base, and at the end there's another 5 sentences which are starting with the letters of the name Elazar. So he's the author, the composer of all of this. Looking at earlier sources, it looks like it wasn't such a big deal one way or another. So long as you have an Aleph-based series, it wasn't such a big issue. You chose one or the other. And then we have also in Nusach Ashkenaz, there's another two Aleph-based in which we don't have in our Nusach, Erich Shavi and I've forgotten the other one. And then there's this another one for Sasei on Shabbos. And so they say that Ashkenaz is different. What seems to be, though, is that for Hoshana Rabbah, everyone has the same Seder. Comes along the Alter Rebbe, and he says the sequence of the six hakofis of, or seven hakofis of Hoshana Rabbah, that sequence should be adhered to also in the days leading up, the whole of Sukkot. So there you can see here. Now, this is from a sefer, a contemporary sefer, Oitzim before Hashanahs, that according to the Balatanya has got a much more rigid seder for Hashanahs, very different to all the minhagim which we mentioned before, just emulating the seder of Hoshana Rabbah, the Mana Mitoch, Even Shasi, etc. Now, there is a reference here to an earlier source, Seder Troyes. Troyes, that's in France. I mean, like Rashi is associated with that city. So there he says, let's read this inside. For the 9 days of Chag, I want you like this. Seder Hashanah for the 7 days. The Yomim Kadmoinim. In earlier days, it was common, it was to say the 7 days as of the Yom Tov, as they are set out for Hoshana Rabbah even today, one per day. And Hoshana Rabbah, they go over the same ones all over. But nowadays, for the first day, there's another one, Nerotz, Seder Kodesh, etc. So this is Seder Troyes, going back hundreds of years ago, saying that originally it was like the Alter Rebbe advises us to keep to the rigid Seder. Fine. So that's as far as Bichlal Seder goes. But what's the significance of the various piyutim and their connection to the various days? So I'm going to just open up a siddur. So the first day we have the Hoshana Man Amitoch, Hoshana Man Bristoch, Hoshana Man Godloch V'Sif Artoch. So the first one, the Aleph base, is largely focusing on the glory of the Shekhinah. And so that's the first day of Yom Tov. The second day of Yom Tov, the focus is on the Beis Hamikdash, Even Shasiah, Beis Abchira, Ger and Ornon. So we've got those. And one of them portions say because they are the first days of Sukkot, therefore Yom Tov they're given them the more choshev ones. The third one is Oiman Yichoimo, and that's very much talking about the Mila of Yidden. And you may have heard this Chassidish Nigun. Mit der Zeilen, der Meile ist von den Jiden. Die erste Meile ist, im Anichoim, noch eine Meile ist, Barak Hacham, Chodsch, Goyla Vesura, doch, Dom Solesam. I'm sure some of you have heard this niggin, but that's clearly the theme of the third day is the Inyan, the Mile of Bnei Yisrael. Then we have the next one. The next three seem to be talking about Gashmias, but on different levels. So some of them Farsi want to say that we don't want to talk about rain, even in the Hishanis, until the last day possible, because rain during Yom Tov is not a bracha. And therefore, that's left to the last day. In this itself, the different minhagim, as our minhag is that we have Domo Me'eres, Sefer Misolam, Adori Medalus, Roiv Me'rozoin. It's talking about the weather, about there should be a good weather. And so that relates to the inyan of rain, and that's dafka left to the last day. In what we have for the fourth day, Odin HaMashiach, is also talking about bracha from heaven, but it's not as explicit. But that seems so. Again, we've gone through focus on the Eberster, focus on the Beis Hamikdash, focus on Bnei Yisrael, then about the Yeshua for Bnei Yisrael. The fifth one is going from the weather or rain goes to Parnosa on the physical side, on the earth side, Behemo, and it talks here about very much about the crops and the etc. So it's talking again about Parnosa, but we're not talking about the weather side, but more the success in the agriculture, etc. So that's why I managed to find, as I say there, in the for the 6 days. The seventh day is all about Eish, Shefat Shanarab. Okay, that's as much as I can tell you. As you can see on the screen, there is a Sefer Eitzim Mafarsha Hashanis, which I used a little bit. There is an art scroll book published probably 40 years ago on Hashanis. I did not look it up. Probably they do have some kind of overview and further information about this. Okay, let's move on. Pass to number 6. What is more correct? Barchenu v'abrocha hamsheleshes u'v'abrocha hamsheleshes b'Torah. So this is when the Chazan says, echoes the inyan of Birchas Kohanim. So what is where the comma should be placed? And there were editions of the Tilas Hashem which had the comma after the word on the word hamsheleshes. Barchenu v'abrocha hamsheleshes b'Torah haksuva. But what you have on the screen is an answer of the Rebbe, and this is published in the Kutasiches Chelek of Dalet. He says, "Benusach b'brocham sheleshes b'Torah, ha-base shel b'Torah mechiach." The fact that there is the base, the way it's spelled, is that it means that the tripleness, if that's a word in English, is in Torah. Ham sheleshes b'Torah. He gives the reference to the Sefer Keser Shem Tov, and that's not from Baal Shem Tov, but from Solomon Gaguin. And right, I'll come back to that in a moment. And then we have another reference, and this is in a Michtov Kloli. Zoichim lebrocha hamsholeshes b'Torah. We merit the bracha which is tripled in the Torah. Yavrecha Chayoris is a letter just before Shavuos. What's the Lashon of Shleshes b'Torah? Because some Mefarshim say that in the Beis HaMikdash, when they did not answer Omen for a bracha in the Beis HaMikdash, they said whatever they answered, but not Omen. And therefore, Birchas Kohanim were bracha achas. That's Lashon the Mishnah in Megillah, I believe. Bracha achas and begvulin sholish brachas. That the bracha Birchas Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash was said just in one sequence, whereas in Begvulin and elsewhere it's said in three sections. In the Torah, how are the Yorecha Yor Yisro? They are written in 3 psukim. So this is the emphasis, Hamsholeshes b'Torah. However, it's said orally, it can be one way or the other. But the way it's in the Torah, it's Hamsholeshes b'Torah. In the Torah, it's in triple form. In my Siddur, I have this quote from Moshe Zakuta. Mischanen lefonov yizborech sheyikayim bonu habrocha hamshuleshes b'Torah. Pirush asoido leneged. That what does it mean? Mshuleshes b'Torah. Again, you see the mshuleshes b'Torah. That it is corresponding to the 3 overs. Yavorecha is Chesed, corresponding to Avraham Avinu, and Yoer is Bigvura, corresponding to Yitzchok, and Yisro is Tiferes, corresponding to Yaakov, and right, left, and center. Okay. Then this last thing is from the Keser Shem Tov. Now this Keser Shem Tov, as I said, Reb Solomon Shlomo Gaguin, he was a Sephardi, lived in London, and he published several Sforim recording the Minigas Sephardim shel Amsterdam and London. And the Rebbe refers to him quite often, I mean Hogim, etc. And he says, all right, so you got this, is it 1 bracha or 3 brachas? You say ba-brocha, it was in single form. Mashmo bracha achas. That implies it's a single bracha. Ze Eino, don't worry about that. Ki Kvar Omar Samach Vanir, he just said Hamshuleshes Batoira. You've said already Hamshuleshes Batoira, Loidio Shehem Shloisha V'loyacha. So it seems to be quite clear that the guidance is that the comma should be after the word Batoira. Hamshuleshes Batoira, it is in triple form in the Torah. Someone mentioned to me that in the writings of Rav Henkin, he says differently. There probably are other opinions out there, but that's what we have and now we've been told. Okay. Um, number that's wait a minute. That was number 6. Number 7. Okay, so how did that get to 7? That's number 8. Okay. So number 7, if you remember, we had a whole discussion about the Rebbe's corrections to the this piyut, which is said in Slichas, and there were changes. And the Rebbe had recommended a list of changes, and then a few years later, the Slichas were printed with the changes, but updated from masculine form to feminine form and so on. And I was curious what happened here. So in Topshin Tesvav, the Rebbe had written a list of corrections, and then they were implemented, but different to the way the Rebbe had written them. So I was asking for people who are more than 10 years older than me if they remember how things developed. So someone who qualifies, he says that he remembers at the time Shmuel Zalmanov commented to the Rebbe that his list of corrections, but they're not grammatically correct. So the Rebbe says the Rebbe's response to him was that wasn't his point of making the exact wording. He wanted to point out that the way they are presented in the popular form and the popular Meslichas, it's incorrect if you want to address the midas themselves. They've been modified. But the exact form, yeah, that can be sorted out properly. If you remember what I mentioned then was that in Tafshin Chavtes, or earlier, Tafshin Chavhei, you got Daniel Goldschmidt, Prince Slichas, based upon his research for manuscripts, and there largely the Rebbe's corrections were corroborated by by Rabbi Goldschmidt, Goldschmidt edition, and then we see in Tafshin Chavtes, that's when the Rebbe's corrections are actually incorporated into the Chabad Slichas, but changed from where the Rebbe had written them in masculine form, they were changed into feminine form. But just the history of this point of Reb Shmuel Bar Zalmanov's conversation with the Rebbe about this. Okay, now what you have on the screen now is actually number 8, and that is about teaching Aleph base or teaching to read Hebrew, teaching a guy to read Hebrew. And the question was from a shliach who was offered to give a course Semitic languages department and to give a course in Hebrew in a university in his town of Shlichus, and he would be keen to take that offer, gives him a foothold in the university. But he was a bit concerned that there may be goyim who will want to join the course, and then is it okay for him to be teaching goyim to read Hebrew language? So I'd quoted, if you remember, a Italian poisek from 400 years ago, Rav Trevis, who said it is okay. Someone sent me later a link to the Ask the Rav from Rabbi Broin. He also was asked this question, and he brings Kedarke Kodesh list of many references, and he's taking a strict position. And so now, and then someone came up with another interesting set of references. So let's see. This is from a Sikha on the screen. It's a Sikha from Tofshin Lamed Zayin, and it's a Sikha from beginning of Sukkot. It was published for the beginning of Sukkot. I'm not sure it's from Yud Gimel Tishri or it's from during Sukkot. I don't remember. Now, the Rebbe says the following. It's talking about the posuk of Halalas Hashem Kol Goyim Shamchu Kol Umim. The Sikha is behemshich to the parsha of Entebi, and the Rebbe is talking about the Goyim praising Yidden, and the Goyim will praise the Yidden, and they're not embarrassed to say Ki Govar Aleinu Chasdei. The Goyim are happy to praise Hashem because Hashem was kind to Yidden, showed kindness to the Yidden. Then the Rebbe adds, as the Rebbe has a style of speaking, sometimes a parenthesis inside a talk. This posuk is a posuk in Tilim, and Tilim is part of Torah Shebechsav. Torah Shebechsav includes Nevi'im Ksuvim. It's been already translated into various languages, and it is permitted for Soilam to learn it. That many numerous poskim say that Soilam are allowed to learn Tanakh. Also Soilam lelamda. The Goyim are not allowed to learn Torah Shebal Peh, besides the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, but Chumash, Kol Alma Muter L'Masolam, they're allowed to. And when Gel Nevi'im Ksuvim, Hachroi Shem Muter L'Lamdo, that Chumash, he seems to differentiate between Chumash and Nevi'im Ksuvim, but that they are allowed to. Now, on the footnote, they give a reference to Stei Chemed. So you look in the Stei Chemed, it's actually a long article, and actually there seems to be quotes there which are much more rigid, much more, and they say, quote from a Zohar and from other sources, not to even to share even a single os of Torah, a single letter of Torah with the Masailam. And then there are a couple of poskim who take this, one of the Tzvi Chayes, I've forgotten who the other one was, well-known poskim, the Netziv, Meshiv Dover. They say you are allowed to teach a goy Torah Shebechsav, not Torah Shebal Peh. And the Stei Chemed, it's about 5 pages, Stei Chemed, back and forth, and much more against than for. And that may be what the Rebbe chose his words carefully, Mashakosav Bekama poskim bazeh. So, but then the fact they write here L'Kulei Alma, well, look in Stei Chemed, it doesn't seem to be L'Kulei Alma. You have the story about the fact that we were meant to write the Torah on the stone so the guy should be able to learn it. All right. That is so much as far as Limud HaTorah, Limud Torah Shebechsav. Then what about language? To teach simply the letters and the language. So he quotes here a Sefer Shelalamda Meloshin Bilvad, and just Pirush Hamilas to translate. That's not a problem. And he brings a proof before Der Haflaga, which is this week's Sedra. Sorry, next week's, the coming week's Sedra. So everyone was speaking Lashon HaKodesh. As it says, Vayikol Haaretz Sofa Echos. And then we have the story when Yosef came to Paroi, and he wanted to teach him Lashon HaKodesh, but Paroi didn't succeed. And then he says you can reject that because of Shalom Malchus, whatever. So you have here even teaching Lashon HaKodesh to Olam is also part of the debate there. But my tendency is, if the Rebbe seems to be accepting, following the approach that you're allowed to teach them Torah Shebechsav, so how much more so that it shouldn't be a problem just teaching Aleph base, etc., and Lashon HaKodesh. And if the question would be clearly a guy is asking me to teach him on his own, that's not the question. Here's the question: is he wants to give a course in the university, and the likelihood is they'll have Jewish students. There might be goyim, there might not be, but that's not his kavana. So all in all, there is certainly mokim lahokil. Although it's good to know that it's not unanimous at all. Now, as I say, in the Stei Chemed, you've got Arichas Gedolah. Yeah. Let's move on to the next point. And that was, we had a discussion last year about taking schach from a cemetery. That the local council have been trimming the trees in the cemetery, and they're offering it to the shliach. You can use it for schach. And the question was about mutter bahanoah, is a mace nochri mutter bahanoah or not? So at the time I said I hadn't managed to find anything. Well, Baruch Hashem, I did manage to find it clearly in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Shin Mem Tes near the Deya, mace, a dead body, Bein Goy, Bein Yisrael, whether Jewish or not, is and this is Tachrichim are also Bahanoah. Now, so this is a quote actually from the Rashba. The Shulchan Aruch is a quote from the Rashba, and then we have here in one of the Meforshim, he says that Meis Yisrael is also Bahanoah min HaTorah, but a Meis Ayved Kechovim is also midrabanan. And therefore, he says so sometimes there would have been a need for some kind of heter. One could be makel because it's not also in hatayra. So that comes back to our discussion. Just to remind you, first of all, who says it grew over a caver? It could be it was in another part of the cemetery, which is not a problem in any case. If it was, then Meis Nochis a suffix. So then becomes a suffix rabbanon. On top of it, I brought in the svara that schach may not be considered a benefit because of mitzvah slav lehonis nitnu. That was the discussion then, but just I'm adding now that the question whether Meis Nochri is also bahano or not is Mefurish Shulchan Aruch, but the Meforshim say that it is a Isur Draban. What else do we have? Right. So this was a question made up my minion just on Friday. So someone asked me that he met some Bochrim who did going on Mivsa Lulav, and they told me that even on the first days when they went around and met people, they did not specify they're giving it b'matona al manas lahachzir. And he asked, is that okay or is it not okay? So certainly not lachatchila. And we're going to discuss this, but you can see in the Hayom Yom that it says that when you go to Mimazaka, someone with your Dal Minim, you should say beferish matona unas lahachzir befrat b'yom rishon. So, and I remember going about 50 something years ago, 53 years ago, going with around with Mr. Glikal Shalom, going on with, so it was just after the breakout of the Yom Kippur War, and we went to Balfour House, and the Yidden were there, hundreds of Yidden to donate blood, and we went there on Mivtza Lulav, and in the corridors people were like standing and waiting, and Mr. Glick went out to Iwan, I'm giving this to you as a gift, and you'll give it on condition you give it me back. This was during Chalamoid, obviously, and and it didn't necessarily fully understand what he was talking about, but that's the halacha, yeah. Now, having said all that, now we take a look at Shulchan Aruch, and this is Tofresh Nun Ches, Seif Hey. It says, Nos no lo stam, hava keilu oma loy almanas shetachzirehuli. So if you meet someone and you gave him your lulav for the mitzvah, it's understood you meant almanas lahachzir. Mistama al ke al das ke nos no loy. That's probably your mindset because you want to kevin shetzorach lotzis boi she'ein lo acher. So when you gave someone your lulav, the person can't say, "Oh, thank you very much, and I'll see you next year." No, he has to give it back. The understanding is that it's amatonam naslahachzir. So what I'd like to say is this halacha is more a dine mominus halacha. You gave someone your lulav, and you didn't specify it's maton maslahachzir. Of course, that's what you intended. It's not saying that the one who received the lulav automatically knows that it's matonam naslahachzir. Yeah, you go to a Fruma Yid who knows that it has to be lochem, so he knows that he's taking it matonam naslahachzir. You find a Yid who doesn't know very much, and you told him, I just have to tie my shoelaces. Can you hold my lulav whilst I tie my shoelaces? No, you're holding it already. Now say the bracha, and you didn't say matonam naslahachzir. He didn't think about matonam. He didn't think he has to own it. So you should say this matonam naslahachzir. Now, one more point though, which I found very interesting. Now, for years I've been struggling with this, but it says in the Hayom Yom that when you give someone else your lulav, you should say matonam naslahachzir or bifrat b'yom rishon, especially on the first day. and that's a benefit for the giver and the receiver. But why would there be a need or any benefit of matana amnas l'chachzir for the rest of Sukkot? When it says befrat b'yom rishon, it doesn't mean and also Yom Sheni. It means the rest of Sukkot. So what's the chiddush here? What's the svara? Why should you do it matana amnas l'chachzir? So now here the Mishnah Berurah says, it said in Shulchan Aruch, you gave someone your lulav, you meant that matana amnas l'chachzir. He adds, even if you have already been yotze that day, you only need it for the rest of Sukkot, and the rest of Sukkot doesn't need to be yours. But amdinon daito de odo. We assess a person's mindset. Even from the rest of Sukkot, that you prefer to use your own lulav rather than a borrowed one. And therefore, even if you have already done the mitzvah today, you still want the lulav back, b'matana amnas l'chachzir, and not that it should be a borrowed lulav. Where does this kiddush come from? It comes from the Maimer Mordechai. Maimer Mordechai lived in Carpentras, which is somewhere it's in France, but not far from Italy. Sometimes it was a part of Italy. Mordechai Karmi, and he says the proof to this is a story in the Gemara with Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Gamliel gave his lulav to Rabbi Akiva. And there's discussion there. It was matana amnas l'chachzir. Now, B'pashtus, Rabbi Gamliel had already been yotze the mitzvah, and still he insists that it should be a matana amnas l'chachzir. Why so? So the answer is because even the rest of Sukkot, there's a preference to use your own lulav. And that may be the toyelis l'noisen l'makabel, that there's a mile in using your own lulav for the rest of Sukkot also. One last thought on that, and I don't have a clarity one way or the other. The reason why we take the lulav for the whole of Sukkot, because in Mesa Migdosh they took the lulav every day of Sukkot. And then so for the Yom Harishon says L'kachtem lochem, has to be lochem, has to be your lulav. In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, for the 7 days of Sukkot, was there need for lochem for the rest of Sukkot, or was there not a need? And if we'd say that there was a need for lochem for the rest of Sukkot, then you could say like this: yeah, we're not nachayiv, it has to be lochem, because what we're doing for the rest of Sukkot is only lezecher, but the hidur that it should be lochem also for the rest of Sukkot, and that would explain this word of the Hayom Yom, that why it's a mile to say matana amnas l'chachzir for the rest of Sukkot also. Yeah, that's what I want to share with you, and wish you all a good tavoch, and we should have sort of service. Kol shlema.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good luck.